I'm Gabrielle Hosein. I'm the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies on the St. Augustine Campus at the University of the West Indies. We had this conference, the Indigenous Geographies and Caribbean Feminisms conference, because we wanted to acknowledge that we live in a space that really belongs to Indigenous peoples, a space that was taken away from them through colonization and in which they have never been able to exercise the kind of self-determination which really remains their right. And so we feel we exist within an indigenous geography with all of those meanings for cosmology, land, medicinal plants, ways of doing agriculture, songs, dances, and as many of the women said today, in terms of how we belong to land and how land belongs to us. We also wanted to do the conference about Caribbean feminisms, and that is because we felt that it's always necessary for us to reflect on the politics of Caribbean feminism, its solidarities, its voices, who's included, who's at the center, who's deciding the agenda. And I felt that for us as a new generation of Caribbean feminists, really setting an agenda that I hope will take us forward for the next 20 years, that agenda is shaped by the struggles and leadership of Indigenous women and the kinds of solidarities that they require of us and the kinds of challenges that requires us to take on.
So what were some of the expected objectives or assumed outcomes you wanted to achieve?
We hoped out of the conference that the Indigenous women who came from 7 different countries and from a range of Indigenous peoples' nations would first of all feel at home when they were gathered here. And secondly, that they would feel a sense of collectivity, that they were given a space to be whoever it is they chose to be and to articulate whatever it is they felt that they wanted to say. Secondly, we wanted to create a sense of regionality. The Institute for Gender and Development Studies is invested in the region and in the struggles for emancipation and justice for all peoples. And so we wanted to give that sense that their struggle was an important one, not just to them, but to us also. And finally, we did want some concrete solutions, but we can't, not just solutions, but concrete outcomes, and also concrete solutions, but those are not for us to determine. And in fact, the Indigenous women suggested that they would like to have a role in determining what those outcomes are. So for example, we hope to produce an edited collection, and they suggested that they want to be an editorial board for that collection, which we really want to honor and respect. And they want other things. They want to put out a declaration that states their solidarity with each other. And we also want to see that as an outcome and a solution that we also honor and respect. The challenges of doing this work are many. We in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies seem to be much bigger than we actually are, much like I seem to be much bigger than I actually am. And for a very small staff who accomplish a lot, we've learned that the more you accomplish is the more that is expected of you. And so the challenges have been trying to meet all of the expectations, not just of the women here, but of all of our expectations that we're managing simultaneously, while also trying to make the space to properly attend to what we ask these women to come and share with us as necessary for us to take on. The challenges were also around fundraising, and in this age where 6-day people own as much as the bottom 3 billion and where the majority of wealth is concentrated in capitalist hands, getting money for social justice work so that you can bring people together and also treat them, nurture them in all the ways that they deserve while here, really puts the pressure of fundraising, unfortunately sometimes even from capitalists, as part of the politics that you wrestle with in this work. And indeed, trying to fund social justice work remains, I think, one of the challenges that we will face in the next half century as economic inequality continues to increase between those who have and those who don't. Finally, the other challenges, I think, have to be taken on personally by each of us. Each of us needs to think about and reflect, and reflection doesn't happen right after or a week after. Sometimes it takes years after. But the challenge has to come to us and to really think about how are we going to take on the things that seem so hard in the beginning or overwhelming or out of our comfort zones, but which we really need to slowly and carefully and incrementally or just sometimes in that moment when it's right, be challenged enough to enact. And so for us at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, I think our challenge is one of enactment. How do we put into practice, however it is we can, and certainly in ways that are manageable, the politics that we have to and that we're called upon to put into practice coming out of this symposium. The idea of the edited collection came about because we found that there were too few Caribbean feminist resources that we could turn to understand Indigenous women's struggles, perspectives, cosmologies, politics, and so on. And we really, in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, want to teach material that comes from our region. We are supposed to be experts in the knowledge that comes from the ground up, that is homegrown. And so producing an edited collection with the permission of the Indigenous women whose voices will be contained within it is really, for me, our most concrete next step. However, for me also, and this is because we need to occupy digital space, for me it's really important that we can put those stories out there of those women who consent for us to do it, so that in teaching in Indigenous programs globally, in Caribbean studies programs globally, in Caribbean studies programs that haven't even been started, or indeed in high schools, that there is material where we have to sit and listen to what Indigenous women are saying through the documentation that we've been able to do. And so for me, uploading those presentations and their perspectives is an important next step also. And the final next step that I think we need to really pay attention to is what is this going to mean for the kinds of statements we make or networks we join in terms of challenging mining, logging, hydroelectric dams, superhighways, petroleum economies. The fact is that capitalism has destroyed our ecology in the region, just like it's destroyed millions and millions of people's lives with no accountability. And so we have a role in demanding that accountability and in supporting those women who are not only demanding accountability, but demanding an end to that mode of controlling life, land, and the future. My personal takeaway from this conference is that is to feel good, first of all, about trying to do the right kinds of political work is important, and acknowledging the kinds of labor, not just my labor, but many people's labor that have gone into supporting trying to do the right kind of political work. My takeaway is that doing the right kind of political work is actually much harder than I ever envisioned, and every time I try to do the right political work, realize that it's a much larger and deeper and more profound process than sometimes I've ever realized. And there's no stepping in the shallow end of the pool in this work. Even though you're fumbling in the dark, I guess, one, going in with the right instincts, but two, sometimes recognizing that you have to stop and find your place in the whole before moving ahead is important. So humility in the work is my second takeaway. And the third one has to do with these phenomenal stories that these women told. I mean, the women in Guyana, or those, the pictures that they showed us about the ways that mines are destroying their, gold mining and other forms of extractive economies are just destroying the land that they have been so deeply connected to for thousands and thousands of years. The absolute disrespect that the Caribbean states to which we pledge loyalty treat them, and the requirement of us to be disloyal to those states and loyal to their struggles. And my takeaway is those women, their faces, their voices, their struggles, their tears. And there was so much crying. There was so much crying. And that tells you about the amount of harm that is being perpetuated. And my takeaway is that it is ever more urgent for us to remember how much they cry telling their stories. And how accountable we are for those tears. But in fact, there is, we can provide solidarity and we can provide support. And we do have to affirm when we are doing that work that we may not always get it right, but that doing that work is the right thing to do. And that's my takeaway.